even at times obstruction of genuine progress. Like David, many black folk have used their musical gifts to entertain.
Well,
from playing fiddles on plantations at their master's pleasure, to creating whole genres of music from gospel, blues, ragtime, jazz, rock and roll, R&B, hip-hop, the list goes on. Though these things have soothed the spirits of the country at times and even shifted the entire culture, it has not relieved them of still being viewed with contempt. Like David, many black people have fought in wars. Everywhere, in fact, from Bunker Hill to Baghdad. Only to be in segregated ranks, have their contributions overlooked or denied altogether, come back and be lynched for wearing their uniforms in public, being denied service at lunch counters or even Title II loans through the FHA or the GI Bill due to redlining and blockbusting. That list goes on as well.
well,
So when I look at the text, I see a parallel here. I say, wow. Still, we can see, just like David and Saul, there's a very schizophrenic relationship between African Americans and their country. Dr. King was a master at illustrating this. But these things are in the past.
right.
And we've been persuaded that times have changed, and consequently so have attitudes, and things are different now. This is essentially what Jonathan told David in verse 2. He says, your father is trying to kill me. Jonathan immediately retorts and says, no, that's not so. That was a long time ago. This is not the 60s. We're different now. We've got a black president. Things are different now. This is essentially what he said. You cannot fault Jonathan. You cannot fault Jonathan because he could not possibly know what David is going through from where he sits. It's not that he's being insensitive. It's not that he's being ignorant. He's the son of the king. He's not the subject of the father's anger. And in this particular society, he and David do not share the same status in the eyes of the father. So he could not possibly know what David is going through. That level of privilege in that context blinds him. Be that as it may, this is the beautiful part about David and Jonathan's relationship. Be that as it may, this doesn't stop these two very different individuals from unifying and covenanting. These two people from different walks of life coming together and saying, despite our differences, look, I love you, brother. And whatever you need, I'm willing to assist you. Jonathan essentially says this. He says, hey, look, I don't think it's that bad as you say it is, but that being said, I'm still going to check on your behalf. That's the modern day version. Jonathan and David represent a sort of solidarity that has always existed between groups whenever they overcome. One is oppressed, the other is privileged, both working together in harmony to achieve freedom, justice, and equality for all.
Amen.
When you go to verses 24 through 31, that's when Jonathan puts David's theory to the test, and sure enough, he finds out that his father Saul is in fact trying to kill David. After giving the excuse of why David isn't there, and basically says, no, he had to go home, he wanted to go back to Bethlehem, be with his family, gives a really lame excuse. Saul's anger burns against Jonathan. And he says in verse 30, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. We can imagine in modern context. That's the PC version. Don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you? He is essentially telling him, you bring shame to your kind by siding with this person against your own blood. We've heard that sort of rhetoric before. That's all too familiar. But Jonathan and David are family in the truest form. They are spiritual brothers. And in verses 35 through 42, we see this sign of solidarity. 3 arrows that Jonathan shoots from out of his quiver, and the coded language used to instruct the boy who was ordered to go fetch them are the sign to David that this is truly his brother. They are in the struggle together, and that Jonathan, even in his position of privilege, is willing to risk his own safety to preserve the life of his brother. This is a beautiful thing. That is solidarity. And this solidarity, as I mentioned before, has always existed. Even for African Americans and white folk. We can look no further than the abolitionists who risked their lives.
Amen.
To life and limb, really, to speak out against the evils of slavery. It's always been solidarity. The Quakers, who helped to orchestrate the freedom of enslaved people through the Underground Railroads. There's always been solidarity. Freedom Summer of 1964, where young whites and blacks from the Congress of Racial Equality and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee put their lives on the line to register black voters in the South. Mickey Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney paid the price of solidarity with their blood. There's always been solidarity. We can see it today as young African Americans across the country today protest the inhumane treatment of black people by many in law enforcement. As incident after incident, video after video emerges of unarmed black men and women being gunned down, and boys, by those sworn to protect them. Blacks and whites lock arms, declaring the simplest, most unaudacious confession that black lives matter. Dr. King was often the leader of these sorts of multi-ethnic coalitions. We've seen it in several iterations, whether it be Selma or whatever it is. In his absence, the charge, I feel, is on us to not just commemorate his contribution, but to build upon and continue in this tradition.